Javier, let's have dinner. Everything will soon get cold. Please, take a break from your textbooks. Darling, if I keep getting distracted, I won't be able to learn anything, which means I won't achieve anything. Oh my God, Javier. Medicine is not for you. You're one of the worst students. Maybe you should drop this silly idea and get a job. Martina, stop it. I already work part-time when I have time. Occasionally standing behind the counter at the local store, is that what you consider a normal job? The girl raised her voice at her husband. She was tired of living paycheck to paycheck. Money was catastrophically short. But she loved her husband, so she endured. In their small house, which Martina inherited from her grandmother, love, support, and understanding prevailed. But over time, financial problems began to introduce more and more quarrels into this family idyll. Money was short even considering that Javier's parents helped. They gave money to their son, but it all went towards his medical education. He had dreamed of becoming a doctor since childhood, and despite enormous obstacles on the way to his dream, the man did not give up. Martina had long forgotten her childhood dream of becoming an actress. She worked as a waitress in a nice restaurant not far from home. One sunny day, Martina returned from her shift much earlier than usual, in tears. Darling, what happened? Her husband rushed to her. Javier, I'm going to be fired, she said through tears. Why would you think that? You've been working at this restaurant longer than anyone else. The guests love you, and they always leave good tips. Martina didn't say anything, she just started crying louder. My love, please don't cry. When you cry, it tears me apart inside. But the girl continued to cry, unable to utter a word. Martina was excessively emotional, which Javier had once found very charming. But he didn't know that the person who laughs the loudest also cries the loudest. Martina, let's go to the kitchen, I'll make you some coffee. They sat in the kitchen and drank the bitter beverage in complete silence. Javier knew that she would speak first and tell everything. There was no need to pressure her. And so it happened. Martina broke the silence, telling about today's not very successful day. I came to the restaurant as usual, 15 minutes before opening. I set up the tables, wiped them down. Everything was as usual. Luisa started telling me about the new owner. He bought the restaurant 2 weeks ago, but we haven't seen him yet. But there are terrible rumors about him. That he's obsessed with money, and there's no humanity in him. Luisa said he'll show up here soon, and we need to be extremely polite to him if I want to keep my job. Because he plans to downsize. Do you see where I'm going with this? Did you speak to him rudely? Javier asked. Not only. I didn't even know what he looked like. The girl started crying again. Martina, my love, why are you so upset? You'll find a new job. You're so smart, after all. But I don't want a new job. I want to work specifically in this restaurant because the chefs and waiters have become like family to me. Martina shouted. Javier was stunned. Why were you fired? I still don't understand. Maybe something can be changed? And Martina began to tell the story of today from beginning to end. She was talking to Luisa when a tall man with a beautiful woman entered the restaurant. Martina immediately took the menu and headed towards them. The man and his companion placed their order. Martina wrote everything down, they exchanged polite smiles, and the waitress left. A few minutes later, Martina brought out the French onion soup from the kitchen and started walking towards their table. Not knowing how it happened, she stumbled, and all the soup ended up not in the bowl, but on the tall man. He jumped up, started yelling about the cost of his suit, about how he would fire her. It turned out that this man was none other than Enrique Castillo, the new owner of the restaurant. His companion stood up and said, Enrique, I can't take this anymore, you're too hot-headed and aggressive. Don't call me anymore. The girl left, and Enrique turned to Martina and said, This is all because of you. Not only did you ruin my best suit, but also because of you, Lorenza left me. You won't get away with this easily. She cried and ran out of the restaurant. And now she was here, in the kitchen with Javier, drinking coffee and struggling to hold back tears. The man hugged his wife and whispered softly, "Martina, darling, there's no need to be so upset. Maybe it's for the best. You'll find another restaurant where there's a decent owner. Or do you want me to go and fight with him, that Castillo? Who does he think he is to upset my wife? Nobody has the right to upset my beloved Martina." The girl sobbed. She hugged her beloved husband tighter when her phone rang. "It's Luisa," she said to Javier. "Then pick up the phone." "Hello. Martina, where are you? Enrique is looking for you." "Oh, not this again." "I won't come," the girl replied with fear in her voice. "Please, come back, he wants to talk to you." "Luisa, I'm scared. He yelled at me so much." "Martina, it's time for me to work. I can barely manage without you. Please come, at least for my sake. The crowd of guests will be pouring in soon, and Eric and I won't be able to handle it alone. Don't let us down." Luisa hung up the phone. How Martina wished she could stay home right now, turn on a series, and forget about everything. But she understood that she couldn't let her colleagues down. She quickly headed to the mirror. In the reflection, she saw a beautiful fair-skinned brunette. Her long hair had a slight curl to it. She wiped away the smudged mascara, touched up her makeup. Many envied her beauty, but it hadn't brought her anything. Of course, many said that with such looks, she could easily become an actress or a model. But Martina didn't even know which doors to knock on to become popular and fulfill her childhood dream. Apparently, she just wasn't meant to star in romantic movies. It happens, and she had come to terms with it. "Where are you going?" Javier asked his wife as she headed for the exit. "I'm going back to the restaurant. Today's Saturday, which means there will be a lot of guests by evening. So I have to go back." "Don't you have to go to medical school?" "No, not today," Javier lied. He had been expelled for failing grades. But he hoped to be reinstated and continue studying medicine. He decided not to tell his wife yet. Martina arrived at the restaurant. The whole hall was full of guests, so she immediately got to work. She skillfully maneuvered between the tables, politely conversed with the guests, her smile never leaving her lips. The new owner observed all this. He sat at one of the tables with the restaurant manager, discussing a new concept. Suddenly he said, "Don't you dare fire that waitress. But you said yourself that you didn't want to see her here anymore." "I was too hasty," the man replied. "My impulsiveness never leads me to anything good. And she's doing her job perfectly well. It would be a mistake to lose such an employee." "I understand," the manager replied. When it was time to close the restaurant and all the guests had left, the manager called Martina over and told her that Enrique wouldn't fire her. But she needed to be more careful in the future. The girl was relieved that she hadn't lost her beloved job because of her clumsiness. Martina always walked from work to home since she lived nearby. But today, as she was about to leave the restaurant, a downpour of such force began that there was only one option: to wait it out. The public transport stop was far away, and a taxi was too expensive. She and Javier counted every penny, so taxi expenses weren't in her plans at all. She sat in the staff room for about 20 minutes. The rain showed no sign of stopping. The manager approached her. "Everyone has already left, and I need to go home. I need to close the restaurant." "Okay, I'm leaving now." Disappointed, Martina left the establishment and headed home, already resigned to the fact that she would get soaked to the bone. But unexpectedly, a luxurious black car stopped next to her. The window rolled down. She turned her head and saw Enrique behind the wheel. "Sit down, I'll give you a ride," said the man. "No, thank you, I'm not far away. I don't want to hear any objections, you'll get all wet." "I'm already all wet," thought Martina, and sat in the front seat of the car. "Thank you," she said quietly. Enrique smiled. "Show me the way, where should I go?" As they were almost reaching the waitress's home, Enrique said, "Sorry for yelling at you when you spilled soup on me. I need to work on my temper." "It's okay. I'm to blame myself. Honestly, I've never done anything like this before." "Do you always walk home?" "They say the downpours will continue nonstop all next week." "I'll take an umbrella," Martina replied. "Very prudent," chuckled the restaurant owner. "But if you happen to be without an umbrella, like today, for example, just come to me. I'll give you a ride, it's no trouble for me." "Thank you, Mr. Castillo," the waitress replied. When she got home, Javier was studying anatomy textbooks. "Darling, everything all right?" For some reason, Martina didn't want to talk about anything. She had mixed feelings. She simply replied, "Everything's fine," and headed to the bathroom. Standing under the shower, she thought about Enrique. He's not as terrible as people say. Polite, pleasant. He even apologized. At the same time, Enrique was driving back to his huge apartment and also thinking about Martina. She's so beautiful after all. Even more beautiful than Lorenza. And Lorenza was too ambitious and smart, a domineering woman. But Martina, she's what I need. A month passed. And throughout that month, the downpours continued incessantly. And every workday, Enrique gave the girl a ride home. He offered to pick her up from home and drive her to the restaurant, but she adamantly refused. Javier confessed to Martina that he was no longer a medical university student. He had been expelled. So now he would be working at a local store full-time. Honestly, Martina was relieved. She understood that Javier had no chance of becoming a doctor. It was very difficult for him to study medicine. He didn't understand much. But now their family would have more money, as her husband would be working full-time. But she was wrong. Javier's salary was terribly small. And she, being a simple waitress, earned much more. Meanwhile, Martina's and Enrique Castillo's communication became closer. The girl didn't confess to the restaurant owner that she had a husband. Although even this fact wouldn't have stopped the man. He fell in love with the waitress, or rather with her model-like appearance. Once he decided to take her not home, but to another place. He didn't say anything to her about it. "Where are we going?" "I want to show you something, you'll like it." At first, the girl was a little scared. She had known this man for only a month, and her beloved husband was waiting for her at home. But on the other hand, she felt long-forgotten emotions, butterflies in her stomach. The feeling of being in love, of exhilaration. She decided to simply enjoy this moment, and if something went wrong, she would immediately say that she was married. They drove up to a skyscraper. Enrique parked the car. They entered the building and went up to the highest floor. There was a restaurant with a view of the entire city. "I thought all the restaurants were closed. This is also my place. On the days when you're not working, I come here. And today, a table is reserved for us." Martina was shocked. Javier had never done such surprises for her. But not because he didn't love her, he just didn't have that kind of money. "Order whatever you want," Enrique said. "I can't, Mr. Castillo. And stop calling me that. For you, I'm just Enrique." Martina blushed. She really wanted to have dinner after a day's work, but she felt so awkward. Enrique noticed this, so he placed the order himself, asking the chef to prepare the best dishes from the menu. "Martina, I want you to relax and enjoy tonight. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'll be honest, I liked you from the very first day we met. And when I yelled at you, and you ran away, I was afraid I'd never see you again." They drank wine, ate exquisite dishes, and talked. Martina texted Javier that she would be late. Her husband was used to it. For the past month, she had been coming home later than usual. But it wasn't because she was staying late at work. Just before heading home, the restaurant owner and the waitress would sit in the parked car and discuss various topics. Now, sitting in the expensive restaurant, Martina lost track of time. Javier started calling her. When Enrique stepped away, she answered the call. Hello, I'm still at the restaurant, but I'll be home soon. Why is it taking so long, Martina? I'm worried about you. I told you, our new owner is just a beast. We work until the last guest, and I still have 2 tables. What awful rules. Will they at least pay you overtime? Of course, they will. I have to go, Javier, bye. Martina quickly hung up as soon as Enrique approached their table. Is everything all right? He asked. Yes, it was my brother calling. We lived together, and he was worried about me being gone for so long. Indeed, we lost track of time. Thank you for the interesting conversation and for this evening. Another month passed. And throughout that month, Martina couldn't stop thinking about the wonderful date at the restaurant. Indeed, she thought about Enrique every day. His athletic figure, his dark hair, and green eyes drove her crazy. Every time she went to work, she was in a great mood, knowing he would be there. And in the evening, he would drive her home. But before that, they would always spend about an hour sitting in the car and talking. Colleagues began to suspect that there was something between the owner and the waitress. But they kept silent. Only Martina's friend, Luisa, decided to remind Martina that she had a husband. Martina, what about Javier? What about Javier? He's boring, aimless, earns little because he lacks ambition. And he doesn't pay any attention to me anymore. Because you distanced yourself from him. You don't even want to spend time with him yourself. And he did have a goal, but he couldn't achieve it. He lost hope of becoming a doctor. And that was his dream. Just imagine how hard it is for him. And instead of supporting your husband, you started a romance with impulsive Enrique. He's not impulsive, Martina objected. Look, 3 waiters have already quit because your Mr. Castillo can't express his opinion without shouting. And he's only kind and polite to you. Luisa, don't meddle in my relationships. I'll figure things out with Enrique and Javier myself. Luisa didn't touch upon the subject anymore. And in general, the friends began to communicate less and less. Meanwhile, Enrique became more assertive. Once he gave Martina a magnificent bouquet. She was very pleased, but what would she tell her husband? She had to lie, saying that her brother was allergic to flowers and she couldn't take the bouquet home. Enrique also invited Martina on another date when she had a day off. The girl agreed, telling Javier that she would go to her friend's birthday party. Of course, Javier also noticed that his wife had changed. Her eyes sparkled, she was inspired, and she started talking less with her own husband. If before they always had breakfast and dinner together, now Martina would leave for work earlier and have breakfast there. And when she came home, she wouldn't have dinner, but would take a shower and go straight to bed. Enrique prepared an amazing date for Martina. They flew on a helicopter and then went to a pottery workshop. When it got dark, they went to a secret lake where they had a picnic. All day they talked about different things, and then the conversation turned to finances. You know, I believe that a man should fully provide for a woman. What about equality? Martina objected. Yes, I understand that the feminist movement is popular now. But I was brought up differently. Tell me, if you had a husband, would you work as a waitress? Martina lowered her head and left the question unanswered. Enrique continued. I don't think so. Girls like you should be in movies or walking on runways, not working as waitresses. And every man should understand that. I understand it. That's why I earn a lot, so my girl, my future wife, never has to work. Martina felt uncomfortable after his statement. She even felt ashamed. It seemed that her husband, Javier, wasn't trying to change their financial situation at all, while a man who had known her for just over 2 months was ready to conquer the world for her. Just remembering Javier, she felt her phone vibrating in her pocket. Someone's calling you, Enrique said. Yeah, it's my brother. I'll call back later. The girl declined the call. Enrique continued his thought. Your brother, he works, right? How much does he earn? I don't know, Martina lied. But he doesn't have a girlfriend. When he falls in love, he'll start earning much more, you'll see. Because a real man will do anything so his beloved doesn't lack anything. Martina tried to force a smile. But Enrique noticed the sadness in her eyes. He hugged her and said, "With me, you'll forget about your problems forever." She looked up, and their eyes met. He gently pulled her closer and kissed her. She didn't resist. There was no one around on this secluded lake. Just Enrique and Martina. They kissed, forgetting about time. But a phone call interrupted the moment. At first, she ignored it. But her phone wouldn't stop ringing. "Pick it up, maybe something happened to your brother," Enrique suggested. Martina answered the call. "Where are you?" Javier sounded very angry. "I told you. You're not answering my calls." I started worrying. I called Louise, but she said she didn't know where you were. "Aren't you at her birthday party?" "No," Martina replied shortly. She was afraid Enrique would find out about her husband. "When will you be home?" "We need to talk." "I'll be home soon. Bye." Martina said goodbye, but she was in such a hurry to hide her phone in her pocket and fall back into Enrique's arms that she forgot to end the call. Javier didn't disconnect either. And what he heard next shocked him. "Everything okay?" a low male voice asked. "Yeah, everything's fine." He was worried about me, asking where I was. "So, it's time for me to go home." "You have a good brother, Martina, if he cares so much about you." "Brother?" Javier couldn't understand what was being talked about. Martina was the only child in the family. He continued listening. "Martina, you are so beautiful. Thank you for spending this day with me. Let's stay here a little longer. I don't want to let you go. To be honest, I don't think I've ever been in love like this in my life. Enrique, I feel so good with you too." Javier felt everything inside him collapse. He couldn't bear to hear anymore. He hung up the phone. For about 40 minutes, he sat motionless, staring at the wall. Then he called Louise. She answered almost immediately. "Javier, hey. So, did you find Martina?" But Javier brushed her question aside. "What's the name of the owner of your restaurant?" "Mr. Castillo," Louise replied, bewildered. "His first name? What's his first name?" Javier nervously asked. Louise possessed incredible intuition, and she understood perfectly where this conversation was leading. "Are you home now? I'll take a taxi to you." "What's his name?" Javier shouted, remembering perfectly that the restaurant owner's name was Enrique Castillo. But Louise had already hung up and headed to Martina's husband. Meanwhile, Martina was eagerly clinging to Enrique's lips. She had already decided for herself she wouldn't go home now. Not now, not in an hour, not in 2. She turned off her phone so that no one could disturb her and spoil their first night with Enrique. When Louise arrived at Javier's, he was finishing off a bottle of some cheap alcohol. "Louise," he noticed the girl who had entered Louise. "I'm worthless. I didn't become a doctor, I earn little, and my wife is cheating on me. Louise, tell me, what's the point of living then?" "Javier, please, calm down, let's talk." "I don't want to talk." "Why did you come?" "Leave," the man shouted. "I'm not going anywhere. I came to talk to you, so we will talk. You didn't become a doctor, Martina didn't become an actress, I didn't become a teacher. Yes, our dreams don't always come true. But we need to learn to live with that. Maybe your calling was to become an astronaut or a singer, or maybe you would have been an excellent engineer. You need to look in other directions, find another path. And Martina. I have nothing to say. We haven't spoken for the last 2 months. Martina. My love, I was waiting for her support so much. But she was ashamed of me, ashamed that I work in a store. Once when she came to my work with her friend asked, "Is that your husband at the checkout?" And she replied, "No, that's my brother." She thought I didn't hear. But I have excellent hearing. And, as I understood, she told Enrique that I was her brother too. Luisa just shrugged. All night long she had been listening to Javier's stories about their wonderful life with Martina, and how this life fell apart in just 2.5 months. The man cried and hoped that his wife would come into the house now and explain everything. And it would turn out that Javier misunderstood everything, or that he had dreamt it all. But Martina never came. She spent the night with Enrique. After a passionate picnic by the secret lake, they went to Enrique's apartment. And there they were engulfed by wild desire again. And in the morning, waking up, Enrique said that he had a lot to do and it was time for Martina to go home. She collected her thoughts and asked to be taken home. But Enrique was surprisingly cold. "Find your own way." Martina was stunned. "But how? I don't even know where I am." Enrique clicked his tongue and rolled his eyes. "My God, I'll call you a taxi." Martina rode home and understood nothing. She and Enrique had a wonderful night, but why was he so cold and indifferent in the morning? Why didn't he take her himself but called a taxi? He didn't even offer her a morning coffee. She looked out the window, remembering their date. It was all so romantic, so beautiful. Martina didn't notice how the taxi brought her home. She approached the front door, came up with a legend about why she had been absent all night, gathered her courage, and entered the house. But there was no one at home. Neither Javier nor his things. There was only a note on the table. "I have nothing to talk to you about. I needed you, but you distanced yourself. You left me when I needed your support so much. I was always there for you, always helped you. When you cried, I always comforted you. Because when you feel bad, my heart breaks. And if you're unhappy with me, I won't hold you. Martina, my beloved Martina, I let you go. However difficult it may be for me. Be happy with him. P.S. Soon I will file for divorce." Martina thought it was a terrible dream. Today her whole life fell apart. Or rather, she herself had destroyed it. She called Javier, but he didn't pick up. She sent messages, but there was no response. Javier had already decided everything for himself. And he was always too stubborn. 3 years passed. Javier and Martina divorced. They didn't communicate and knew nothing about each other's lives. Martina still worked as a waitress, only in a different restaurant. Because when Enrique got his trophies, namely, a night with a beautiful waitress with model looks, he began to treat her like everyone else. Mr. Castillo didn't hold back in his expressions, shouted and disrespectfully treated the staff. Martina couldn't stand it and quit. Now she lives alone in a small house where once love reigned instead of loneliness. One weekend she decided to do a thorough cleaning, turned on the radio, and started washing the windows. Suddenly she heard a familiar name and surname. She turned up the volume. Probably just my imagination, she thought. But when she heard his voice, the voice that once pronounced her name so tenderly, she couldn't believe it. "Javier, can you tell us what brought you into the film industry?" "Since childhood, I dreamt of becoming a doctor, even studied at one of the best medical universities. But to be honest, I was a terrible student. Medicine wasn't my thing. But I couldn't let go of my dream. Then I got expelled. I was terribly depressed. And then came the pivotal moment. My very good friend said to me, 'Javier, you need to look in another direction.' And I thought, if I can't be a real doctor, I can become an actor and play a doctor. You're very lucky to have had someone guide you." Yes, absolutely. If it weren't for Luisa, I would have never known I had acting talent. Is Luisa the lady of your heart? Luisa is my best friend. We have strictly platonic relations, and I'm grateful to her for being there when I needed support. So your heart is free? Perhaps. On this beautiful note, we bid farewell to Javier Torres, a wonderful actor and the most eligible bachelor in our country. Martina immediately went online and typed Javier Torres movies into the search bar. She saw that in the last 3 years he had starred in 2 films and 1 popular series about doctors. She read all the articles about him. Film critics predicted a brilliant acting career for Javier. "I hope you're happy, Javier. That's all that matters," she said aloud, wiping away her tears.